Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Hope everyone had enjoyed last night as much as I did. I was really overwhelmed at various times and so grateful for what our host put together with that. Excuse me, my voice is about done here. You can't hear it, or there's a clicker. I am going to let our panelists introduce themselves, and we also have one virtual presenter for the conference, and he's for this panel. We had no substitute for this person. The program had gone to print, and he got COVID for the first time. So we're grateful that he decided not to join us, but we really miss having Brees Edwards here. And so I'm going to stretch it out a little bit when we get to Brees's presentation so that they can do whatever work their tech magic to bring Brees in virtually from Oregon today. There's a couple different parts to this panel. I've said before that the 2018 NATHPO conference was the first one that I attended, and I did that as a panelist myself, and it was to talk about the project that Brees is going to talk about, the BOEM project that started it all. And we've been excited to pick it up and run with it here at NATHPO. BOEM is also resuming the project. Dave Ball is here. Can you wave, Dave? They're doing sort of a 2.0 version on the West Coast as well. And we use certain terms and phrases talking about that project, tribal cultural landscapes. And then in the past year or so, what I've been hearing from our partners here at United Auburn and the things that they're going to talk about, realize it's basically the same thing with slightly different words and phrases. And Eric Thorsgaard, who we did the project with when he was a THPO at Grand Ronde. Now he's at BIA in that same region, also was not able to join us. He said, so basically what we're trying to do here is come up with a way to talk about things that aren't supposed to be talked about to people who aren't supposed to know about those things. And that is using tribally determined methods on the places that are of interest to you and documenting them in a way and a way of your choosing, and then sharing only what you want with anybody else in advance of proposed undertakings. And that's what all of this session is going to be about. And we'll have Brees present last. And I'm going to turn it over to our partners at United Auburn. We've done a webinar with them talking about this first guide, and I'm excited to hear about it again. And then there's another component related to low impact assessment that they're going to talk about as well. And I've been really excited for this session. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians for hosting this event in their beautiful homeland, and we're really honored to be here today. My name is Anna Starkey. I'm the Cultural Regulatory Specialist with a background in archaeology with the United Auburn Indian Community Tribal Historic Preservation Department. So this presentation today, it is derived from our Section 106 Best Practices document that we have provided here today for you. There's copies in the back. We prepared this document to assist local agencies and state and federal agencies during the Section 106 process to help guide them on what tribal values mean and what they are to the tribe. While preparing the document, I opened up Section 36, part 800, and I counted how many times the word tribe or tribal were in section 106. I counted 161 instances, and that's not including THPOs. There are 0 for archaeology, 2 for archaeological, and 3 for the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. So what does that mean? That means to us that archaeological values must not be privileged over tribal values during the Section 106 process. And because it often is, we must educate agencies on what UAICs and the tribal process and goals are. Our best practices document is one of the tools that we use for this purpose. Part of this education for agencies is for them to learn or understand that there is a difference between tribal resources and archaeological resources, and tribal landscapes and archaeological landscapes. There's a difference in how they are identified, evaluated, and treated. Archaeological values are used for archaeological sites, and tribal values are used for tribal sites. Although they can also be the same, it's the process that we use and how they're treated, which is different. So we made this table here to outline the goals and the processes and how they are similar and how they're different between archaeological goals and processes. Our goal is to identify, preserve, and evaluate, and to restore sites. And the archaeological processes and goals are to identify, evaluate, and get that information out by excavation. In the Section 106 process, there are phased identification approach. We are advocating for agencies to consider non-ground disturbing identification methods for before considering archaeological testing. In this table, we show how to complete these various phases without any ground disturbance. The Tribal Historic Preservation Department used these methods with great success. Phase 1 can include consulting with tribal communities and elders, archival and map review, and a tribal survey. Extended phase 1 is still part of the identification effort, and it includes using drone surveys, ground penetrating radar, canine forensic surveys when burials are suspected, and traditional burning. Phase 2 is preservation and evaluation of significance that is established through such things as site boundaries, tangible and intangible elements of sites, and the consideration of landscapes. There is a phase 3 as well. And for the final phase, phase 3 for archaeologists, that involves data recovery and excavations, which are very problematic for tribes. Matt will be discussing phase 3 here in just a bit. So every project is different, and every project will have its own appropriate approach for these phased identifications using non-ground disturbing methods. So we like to call this low impact methods of cultural resources identification. So one method is drone surveys. Oops. Drone surveys are a great method to cover large project area footprints and access hard to reach areas or detect features on the landscape that may be missed during a pedestrian survey. It can also be useful for elders who are unable to go on site visits. So on this picture, each of the points on the picture is a high definition photograph that the drone took. And then those photographs are stitched together to create a 3D mesh model of the landscape. And these models can be imported into GIS programs. LiDAR is another useful tool. and technology that we use. It creates 3D models of cultural sites and objects. And this photo is a tribal preservation staff. We're on site in an area that the tribe has not had access to in the past, scanning bedrock mortars and groundstone, pestles and handstones. By scanning these sites, we can share them with tribal elders and the community that wouldn't otherwise have access or the opportunity to see them. And we may never have the opportunity to visit these sites again because they're on private property. Ground penetrating radar is another very useful tool to help identify subsurface features and structures without ground disturbance. United Auburn has used this technology in their tribal cemetery to help identify unmarked burials. And it's had great success with that. Magnetometry is another tool to identify buried features, and it is done by measuring the variations in the ground's magnetic field caused by differences in the magnetic properties of the underlying soil and subsurface materials. I don't fully understand it yet, but apparently it works well. Both the ground penetrating radar and the magnetometry surveys, we are working with UC Berkeley, which I know has had a very bad reputation, but we have their staff now. We work closely with them and they really consider tribal values, and they've been a real ally to collaborate on these projects. Canine forensic surveys. United Auburn has had great success using the highly trained human remains detection dogs on a wide variety of projects to help identify the locations of burials, cremations, isolated fragments, or burial soils. These locations, once they are identified, can be avoided and protected. The tribe also used the canine forensic surveys in their tribal cemetery to identify cremations and ancient burials that they knew were there, but they didn't know where they were located. And we've had great success using the canine forensic surveys in their cemetery and also on state, federal, and local projects. We've worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and for their big levee projects and to help identify the human remains. And so far it's been a very useful tool that once these sites are identified, they can be avoided. So next, I'm going to have Matthew Moore, United Auburn Indian Communities, THPO.
Good morning. You want to do the slide one? Thank you. I'll be talking, well, I am Matthew Moore. I'm the THPO with United Auburn Indian Community. Been THPO for the last 7 years. I'm going to be talking about land clearing and fuel reduction, followed up with traditional burning. Just briefly, I'd like to explain my past. I had a 25-year firefighter experience, or 25 years experience in firefighting. I started off on hand crews, as well as a volunteer firefighter. I worked for the Forest Service for a brief stint. I moved on to the state, and at the time it was called California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. They moved on to call themselves CAL FIRE now, it's just so they can be the largest fire department in the world. But it's still the same kind of ideals that they follow with their suppression efforts. There's been a lot of progress in suppression, but unfortunately their tactics are a little behind at times. From hand crews, and I went on the helitech crew, did that for 2 summers. And I went on to work for municipal firefighting, City of Sacramento Fire Department. And that's where I retired from. After that, I became THPO and started doing preservation work. So it really came to me at that point when we're working on our sites that it was obviously when you go out on the landscape and you look at say on the forest, when you're past practices for our sites is flag and avoid, which for a long time that worked, but as we all know, our fuels these days have built up so heavily that it's become extremely dangerous situation, not just for the landscape, but for people. In California, we've been having these mega fires for the past 5 years. Millions of acres have burned and a lot of life was lost. And unfortunately, a lot of our sites were damaged or destroyed due to the intense heat, but also through firefighting efforts. Bulldozers are one of the biggest culprits out there. Did a little bit of looking into the past history of using bulldozers and realized that bulldozers don't work. Dozer lines do not work. No fire has ever been stopped by a dozer line. They use these a lot of times for contingency lines, which is not even on the fire. It's set back way far away, just in case it gets that far. But unfortunately, they're going through our sites and they're using our sites as kind of fire breaks. So we're losing resources and we're stuck picking up the pieces, basically, like usual. So as a THPO, I was able to bring a different skill set with my fire background. So I really was wanting for a long time to form some kind of a crew that was specialized in not just fuel reduction, but just getting the native hands back on native lands. I think that connection that we bring and honoring our ancestors and their thousands of years of burning the land and what the land looked like. When the first settlers came into California, they noted that the landscape looked like a park. It was an oasis. It was pristine, and they obviously knew that it was being heavily tended to. They just didn't know how. They also noted that when they were going through the countrysides, that they noticed a lot of the indigenous people were burning all the time, and they couldn't figure that out. So, long story short, the progression, I guess, with fire, and the more they noticed us doing that and the outcome, they realized that it had a benefit to the land. So ranchers, settlers actually in ranching started to burn themselves for grazing, fortunately. So back in last summer, we formed a crew. We're calling it the Coyote Crew. This kind of stems back to one of our creation stories where Coyote stole fire and brought it to the people. So we're looking at it in a different way. Coyote is now bringing back fire once again. So the Coyote Crew is an intertribal group trained in fuel reduction and putting good fire back on the landscape. They'll also be trained and qualified to be firefighters on wildfires. So this crew will be capable of actually responding to wildfires, working with resource advisors, preferably, so that we can actually get ahead of some of these suppression efforts, reducing a lot of the destructive suppression efforts. By doing the fuel reduction on our sites, and I mentioned the flag and avoid policy, we're trying to advocate that we need to get in there and start cleaning these sites up, removing the fuels off the site, getting that heavy fuel load off of our rock features, which are super susceptible to heat. That in itself was just allowing the sites to kind of open up and breathe once again. And it was, you kind of get this feeling when you do these kind of important tasks that you get this feeling that it's just there's an improvement in just the feeling of the area, and it'll actually start to reveal more information to you. So we've been using this method to actually not just bring back, allowing these sites to breathe once again, but to bring back the safety to these sites, preventing them from future destruction. Putting good fire back on the ground and the landscape rehabilitates the land from sickness by removing fuels and invasive plant species. making it healthier and a safer place to live for all life. We call this fire good medicine, or fire is medicine. It's medicine for the landscape, it's medicine for the plants, the insects, the animals, and the people. Bringing back fire to the landscape also, what I've noticed is really helping with our psychological health, mental health, by putting our hands back on the land. That good old fashioned hard work, labor, getting dirty, it brought this feeling back to us that we're doing something bigger than ourselves by bringing back health in our ecosystem, and at the same time honoring our ancestors. So we talked about phase 3, which is typically data recovery. Instead of data recovery, we're actually advocating for documenting these cultural sites and the landscapes by using ethnographies, restoration of native plants, documentation of traditional place knowledge, reestablishing the integrity of materials in place, reburial of ancestors and their belongings, and acknowledgement and ceremony. So the documentation of these landscapes and the cultural sites, and bringing in these new modern technologies, which are non-invasive, we're able to take this technology and information and actually import it into a GIS system, which allows us to pull up information. Say when we create maps, we can actually put layers on these maps that show different types of information based off of the LiDAR, the magnetometry, the GPR, and the canine forensics. So that's been really beneficial for us in our work, so that we're better able to go into places with the understanding, and we know what to avoid at the same time, and we're able to pass that along to agencies. So I think the outcome is much more meaningful for us. And as the agencies get on board, they find that that is actually working better for them as well. So with the GIS system, that's been very critical for us. That's such an important tool to have. And I encourage you, if you don't have that program, find a way to get the funding to do so, because it's critical, and get the training. To have somebody highly trained in GIS is invaluable. You just can't even, I can't even explain it. It just helps us do our work so much better. With the mapping, it helps inform written documentation as well. So we've been working with UC Berkeley, as Anna mentioned, with some of their archaeologists. Damn, it's early, I can't talk yet. So with these small group of archaeologists and their students, they're more aware of what we're seeing and where we're coming from when we talk to them. They're more community-based type archaeology, like Rebecca likes to always mention. Archaeologists should be getting familiar with the community and therefore gaining their trust and respect. So by working with UC Berkeley on their, it's a UC Extension experimental forest called the Blodgett Forest. This is where we have a few sites on that property, and they are constantly experimenting with fire, but in different ways, not in a cultural context. This strictly research, and they're looking at timber harvest and other things, which that's not really our interest, but we can, get our information into them so that they can maybe better do their research to get better information. We do a lot of timber harvest plans, and we get a lot of that coming through our office. So that kind of helps us too, to kind of have that little better conversation back and forth. So these cultural sites and these methods, we're able to actually uncover a lot of subsurface features like house pits, other grinding rocks, artifacts, and other cultural features that would not normally be seen from the surface. And I think, what's that? Oh, so, okay. Yeah, next. So with restoration, bringing life and breath back to tribal landscapes brings health back to the people, not just to the animals and the insects and plants. Avoiding future adverse effects. We're reducing the fuel, which makes it safer. The devastating fires that may go through, we're not going to be able to have the heat transfer to continue to burn. So we're creating a mosaic. Traditional burning, that was the purpose. It was creating a mosaic effect on the landscape. It was, what we see now a lot of times is a monoculture, just certain species taking over. With cultural burning, it allows you to really break things up where your plant communities are spaced properly. They're in healthy numbers. When you look at plants, agencies see fuels, and that's what they're only concerned with, is fuel reduction and acreage treated. For us, it's more important that those acres treated also have benefits in the long run so that they can come back and be healthy once again. And the cultural fire is very different from what they call prescribed fire. It's agencies just don't know how to burn the land. They just don't. They're not trained in it, and that's not their expertise. They're putting fires out. So when they do put fire on the land, it's typically just more devastation. Doing massive 30-foot burn piles with heavy timber, that heat's there for a very long time, and it's getting very deep into the soil. So it's going to take that much longer to recover. Cultural fire is really basically very low intensity back burning, which we burn against the wind. Well, instead of burning uphill, we'll burn from the top of the hill down. That creates much less intense heat, better fuel consumption on the surface for finer fuels, therefore eradicating the invasives and not getting down in the seed bed where the native plant species still exist. Those native plants have been there for a very long time, decades. It's probably been well over 100 years since cultural fire was used. So those plants are still there. They're just waiting. So by removing that layer and bringing back the fire brings carbon, it produces carbon, it brings it back into the soil. Carbon actually is like a sponge. It works by retaining moisture in the soil. It absorbs all the nutrients from the soil and it stores it for long term. So the soil really has its own kind of micro ecosystem going. And good fire is critical for that. Carbon sequestration also is critical for cleaning the water. As that charcoal erodes away from the hillsides, it gets into the waterways. So once it's in the water, it's actually absorbing the impurities in the water. So it's cleaning the water, it's scrubbing the water. So it's critical for water quality. Yes, last page. But yeah, that's basically what I have. And in this picture, I'd like to point out, you can see one of the first things that usually returns after fire are the wildflowers. And it's pretty impressive. Even in some of these hotter wildfires, you see sometimes entire hillsides come back with native plant species in a very short time. On the bottom, you see that's where this is in California, where Chairman Ron Good has some land, the North Fork Mono tribe. They get to burn this land from time to time, and they bring in a lot of agencies and students from, say, UC Berkeley to participate in that. So they're teaching that whole ideal of bringing back health to the land through fire, bringing that medicine back to the land. And this was actually a burn pile. And then you notice the first thing to come back was tobacco. So you're looking at tobacco growing back from what we believe was a house pit at one time. And it was interesting because it was in a nice circle and everything around it was burnt, but right there was a patch of tobacco. So that's the effects that we're trying to go for. And agencies, they're not there. But we're trying to teach them, and if they listen, they will understand that by working with tribes and using cultural burn practitioners and cooperating with that, changing their policies and attitude towards prescribed fire and just fuel reduction in general. It's not just treating acres, it's you're bringing health back. So it's going to be a uphill climb, but we're getting there. And I think more people are receptive and understanding, especially in California, because people are against burning or complaining all the time. Oh, all summer long, we breathe smoke. Well, if you burn in the winter, in the fall, you're not breathing that much smoke. And in the summer, when these fires come through, they're a lot less devastating, and they shouldn't grow to 1 million acres. Back in the day when I first started firefighting, a big fire was maybe 30,000 acres. And that was a big fire. Now, I mean, that's just a, drop in a bucket. It's considered just an average fire. So it's things have really changed, and not for the better. So we're trying to reverse that and bring back that attitude that the ecological health is more important than just reducing fuels. Reducing fuels is important. That's just the first step. Oftentimes their methods are used through mechanical equipment, mastication, chipping. For us, we do it by hand, and maybe sometimes we'll chip or do some light mastication, but the equipment does a lot of ground disturbance, and we don't like to see that. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. That's why we formed this crew to be specialized in going in and hand treating the landscape, in particular our sites, which is bringing back that connectivity to our people as well. Our first burn that we did a few weeks ago on one of our lands was for a meadow. We were trying to restore a meadow that was being encroached by conifers. There was a lot of star thistle and other invasives. We have a Medusa head and goatweed. So these things are all just choking these meadows out, and over time we're losing it because of the encroachment of the invasive plant species and the conifers, which do not belong in meadows. So we were able to go in and clear that, pre-treat it, so that when we did put fire on the ground, it wasn't going to burn overly hot or do more damage. It was actually a little bit, I don't know how to put it, but anyway, our effect that we had after that fire was it was very emotional for a lot of our members on the crew. That's when they got it. It just clicked, and they just felt that they can feel their ancestors talking to them. So that really just kind of reinforced that everything that we were trying to teach, and they were listening, they were paying attention. These are young people, kind of a target group that we identified that were kind of getting missed within our tribe. We focus a lot on our elders and the young children, but there's that gap in that 18 to 30-year-olds, and this is the group that I've been kind of pulling from. Some of them are here right here today, and maybe you can ask them what their experience has been like. I can't speak for them, but I know for me, it was just being able to do the first cultural burn in Placer County in over 100 years was just, it was overwhelming. I mean, I was numb, and somebody had to pinch me several times just to let me know that this is actually happening. But so it was really very healing and motivating for a lot of us. So I think what we started is the beginning of something just so important for our tribe and our people, and not just our tribe, but the tribes around us. I thought it was important that we would bring in multiple tribes to participate in this, because it was also bringing in reconnecting our communities. A lot of our younger folks, they didn't realize how many cousins they had, and they're meeting their new cousin, or not new cousins, but meeting their cousins for the first time, just by being on this crew. And I thought that was pretty special just by itself. So There's just so many things about this. It brings everything full circle because as we know, everything's connected. Fire is medicine, and it's medicine in so many ways. And I'll just leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that you ended on that. This is all very full circle for me too. So while our AV is making the magic happen to bring Brees here with us, I'm going to talk for a couple more minutes. That was so interesting. Gosh, it's all connected, right? It's all related. We're all talking about the same thing here. I love the through line, Anna, in your presentation from the workshop on Monday. Gosh, and it actually, that was kind of one of the first revelations I had about this too. When we started that project, Dave, you made the money available. I was at NOAA as a contractor, needing to keep myself employed, and we contracted with 3 tribes to do that project. Makah in Washington and Grand Ronde in Oregon, of course, and then also Yurok. Is Rosie here? I know Rosie's here. I don't know if she's here this moment. And we got everything in place, and we were project planning and starting to plan the meetings and the workshops and ready to go. And it came up in conversation. I think it was Rosie who said, well, Yurok doesn't do archaeology. And I went, did we know that? And Dave says, that's perfect. That's perfect. It will demonstrate the model even better than if everyone did do archaeology, and the validity of tribally determined methods to agencies. And in putting this together, I was talking with Jamie Arsenault, our member at White Earth. I don't know if Jamie's joining us from Internet Land. I hope so. We miss you here too, Jamie. She's been doing some work with dogs. And then Mr. Rod, you also called me and reached out about that, and we had a conversation. And thank you again for your offering of your song last night. And it's just so cool when all of these things come at you from different directions, but it's the same stuff. And you know you're on the right track when that happens. So I wanted to say too, I'm so grateful when you all do that. You reach out to us to let us know what your interests are and what your needs are. That's what we're here for. And we need that information. And so this will be the final part of a workshop series that we've been running under a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And that money was National Endowment for Humanities money that they administered under this Telling the Full History grant program. We've done 2 virtual workshops in this. Welcome to the workshop. This is the final one that we'll be doing. The other document that was in your conference bag besides the program was the guidance document that we came up with as part of that project. And to wrap up this grant project, we will be taking the template for tribal data collection that's in that and fleshing that out kind of United Auburn style into what we hope will be a useful guide for folks. And all of this will be part of that. But one place that we left off with that project, and it wasn't really in the scope, so it's been very exciting to be able to continue that work here is funding. And that's what Brees is going to be talking to us about today. And as we've been another through line of the conference talking about the whole time, funding is everything. Your ability to have the staff you need to do the work that you want in the ways that you want. And so here's all these great models, here's all these great tools, and being able to empower yourselves to actually use them as one really critical part of the component. And in all conversations that I've had about this, another part is normalizing it into federal decision-making processes. And so we're so glad that some of our agency partners and industry partners are here with us today, because you're a really critical component in that equation. And this is how it starts. And with everyone, with all of us together, uniting our voices and pushing on this, then it's a movement. And I think that's what we're experiencing here. So it seems like we have Brees ready. Queuing up the presentation here. I'm seeing the Zoom magic happen.
And do I have audio? Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you all for this opportunity. First, I apologize to our hosts that I know that they put a lot of work into bringing all of this together, and I was looking forward to spending some time catching up with Stephen there. And again, special thank you to NATHPO for all of the work that you've been doing to help bring forward sovereignty issues and cultural resource issues, and just facilitating tool making in this regulatory world. And what an amazing presentation just before this. Yes, I feel like I'm just going to be redundant now. What United Auburn is doing is just amazing. We're doing many of the same things, but that's at a new level. And I want to maybe talk offline about your Coyote crew. We're looking at trying to put something together similar to that here in Oregon. So, but with that, I'm, as you just heard, we're trying to follow up on kind of a workshop number 3 on tribal cultural landscapes. I'm going to kind of do a really quick recap of the first couple of workshops for those that missed them or might have, oh, what was that thing again? Type of questions. And then really let's get into some questions or conversations about funding. And I think having some good Q&A, if we can facilitate that via online here, it would be great, because I think it's trying to field questions where we all learn a little bit more. So with that, let's see if I can make my technology work. And let's do it that way. There we go. So really, let's start with this definition, the definition that we've been operating with, and I think you'll find it in that characterizing, tribal cultural landscapes. The definition is really at the crux of so much of this. The one that we developed with BOEM, and at that time Marine Sanctuaries Unit of NOAA, that we're looking at basically everything that probably all of us are familiar with. Tribes know themselves. Tribes know what is important and where those important places are, and the connection between practice and places and people. And the definitions here really key in on that. And it holds that only the tribes, those communities, are the holders of that real knowledge. Others may operate as if they know, but really it is dependent upon, you'll see here, tribal cultural landscape is determined by and known to culturally related group of indigenous people with relationships to that place. That's not an exclusionary statement. It allows multiple communities from far afield to have knowledge of the same place. And I threw in another link here for that guidance document as well. So let's see, there we go. So really quick recap is, let's see if I can make that go out of the way, it's all predicated on everything that we already are operating with. What are the needs? What are the methods? Why? And what are the resources that are important? These are all internally defined. whether it's the elders committee, the cultural resources community, tribal leadership, tribal community, general membership. This is, every community is different, but it is a way of bringing information together in a usable way that's usable for community, it's usable for working with outside agencies, and to start to operate in a language set that agencies might be familiar with. And GIS is one of those great platforms, as we just heard from Matthew. I echo everything he said about GIS. It's an amazing tool. It levels the playing field in many opportunities or occasions. I am continually having conversations with agency people who look at our GIS and what we do, and they're just like, wow, you guys have it dialed in. You must know what you're doing. And that's subtle, but it makes a huge difference. So, again, TCL, what is it? Think of it as a way of taking information that can be historically understood in very kind of black and white grayscale, and bringing forward that enriched understanding of place and interconnection in a way that basically is technicolor. It's a way of bringing new understanding to places that have only been understood through an outside lens. So, what and how can you record it? Well, what is to be recorded is really defined by you, the community. It's, we out of our office operate under people, place, and practice. That, some of you have heard this from me before, but people and place, nouns, but at the end of the day, those are just lists of places. It's practice. That's the action, that's the verb. Without the two, you can't have a sentence. And if you can't have a sentence, how can you expect anybody to have some understanding? So we really rely on talking to all three of those. They may kind of teeter, and with more knowledge of practice in some place, but we may know more about place and not so much about the practice of that place. And practice can be everything from, oh, that's where we gather junkus, or, oh, that was grandma's place, or, oh, we don't go there. Those are all places. Those are all practices. Not going someplace is also a practice. So it can be as simple or as complicated as you want. You can, do it with a map, index card, and strings. When I first started, that's actually what I did. I had a map, and I had sticky notes, and I would put them up, and I would wind up with kind of 5, 6, 8, 20 sticky notes stacked deep in certain places on my map. And that led to, oh, well, actually, this is going to work a lot better in GIS. And with that, GIS gives you a lot more flexibility. It's a kind of a neutralizing platform. It serves as an archival platform as well, meaning that if we're done doing something over here, that information is still there, and it's in a format that we can convert into another function, another purpose. We could see information generated and pushed into an atlas. Maybe that's an online atlas for a phone for community, or a published, text-based paper atlas that can be put up for sale or gifted. What you're seeing here in this image is an example of those kind of stacked sticky notes, if you will, across the landscape. This is, I think my cursor will show up here. here's the Willamette Valley, and we were doing a project over in the Cascades here. And basically you see kind of heat maps of where we have density of information. We didn't wait, knowing where a fishing spot is versus where a hunting or a pigment place is. We didn't put any weights. We just said, in this image, what do we know where? And so this is a really simple version of how that information can be generated, but we're also not giving away details. And that was another important thing in the TCL studies that we've done. And I think I've heard is of importance by other communities, other tribes. So yes, here's an example. It can be old school. You can print out maps, put them up on the wall, trace circles on it, and then key that information back in. What is some of that information? Well, these are in many ways very general themes of information that we collected in our very first go around with that BOEM project that you heard about. We, in more recent years, as you saw in the previous slide, we have changed our approach. We've refined all of these categories. We've put in a lot more usable information, and probably one of the most important elements in our kind of seeking to understand is, while our first attempt was based on information that was already in the public domain, our kind of version 2.0 and now 2.2, we're bringing in those oral histories, those long held histories of the landscape, the economy. And it's not just about Coyote and all the work that Coyote does. It's that when Coyote is engaging with vine maple, if you're out working in the forest and you come across vine maple, you automatically know the lessons that go with vine maple. So finding those habitats that are important to vine maple are now very important culturally. It's not just that vine maple was used for X. So vine maple is connected to the economy. It's connected to setting the world in order. So that's a very important kind of new step that we brought forward. So what are the applications of this? It's internal to community. There's a whole suite of applications. There's reconnecting to place. We just heard from Matthew, he used the word reconnection as well in the burning practices, bringing that health, that medicine back to place. It's about reconnecting peoples and practices back to place internally. And we've had an amazing opportunity that's grown out of the work that we've done and the way we've done it, for bringing elders and youngers and that middle generation that you also heard about. It's about bringing oral traditions of understanding also back to place, or in some cases, bringing those places to that intangible understanding, and getting them reacquainted. I mentioned development of Atlas. We started with developing an online app with collector app for GIS. That's Esri's not supporting it the way they used to. So we're looking at developing a new online platform for phone and tablet, so that when community goes out, they can check on the health of place and kind of crowdsource understanding. They can enrich the understanding this way. There's also that external outward application of TCL as well. And that's the documenting the complexity of the landscape. It's not just, as we heard, an archaeological approach of, there is a thin lithic scatter that sits there. It measures 20 by 10 meters. There is a line around it, and let's move on. And oh, look, there's another thin lithic scatter. But actually putting in elevation, seasonality, and other things, you now start to understand those aren't just thin lithic scatters. That's a much more complex place that actually does warrant protections and should not be erased because of other values. It's highly significant. But without that contextual understanding, that complexity gets lost. It becomes the tool for conversation with agencies, whether it's to prompt them and ask them, why are you not doing this? Fund us to do it. Or, hey, we have this information. You are responsible for fire restoration, for example. Let us help you with how you might succeed in restoration now. Put in some mosaicness. Let's bring in some patch scaling of appropriate plants that want to be there and are most likely already in the seed bank. It can be an approach to meet NHPA and NEPA resources. And we've started using it as a report card. Hey, look, this is how you, federal agency, your management practices have done X on the landscape, and this is what we're left with an understanding. However, if you were to enhance certain attributes or elements, we would see a much healthier cultural landscape that would be of use for the community. And here's an example. On the left, you'll see kind of an as is in this area. It's not very good. There's high elevations basically have less impact because it's just harder. And honestly, the agency isn't doing as much management there. So it's actually pretty healthy for practice and protection of the archaeological sites and the gathering places there. But with a little bit of work, and you'll see here on the left, with certain kind of bumping of elements and these recommendations, you could see a much healthier landscape like this. And line staff are always looking for the tools to succeed. For supervisors, for instance, are also looking for ways to partner. Which brings us to funding, right? Great ideas. It takes a lot of time to do these sorts of things. How do we go about it? And I would say, start by asking. And it's about, hey, agency X, you have these obligations. How can you fund this kind of work? And maybe it's only a 10,000 acre area, or maybe it's a 1,000,000 acre area, or it's going to be splotchy, but over time, as funding and staffing converge, you can basically crowdsource over time this larger understanding, and knowing that the more that you can bring into a central place of understanding, the more complexity is going to emerge, which is just the reality. The world is complex, whether it's today, last week, or 10,000 years ago, it was complex. So I threw up an example here of using the regulatory process, and we've had success with using programmatic agreements and memorandums of agreement, MOAs, as whether it was just one-to-one or direct contract, or MOAs as they relate to a mitigation need. But let's just take this example here, that understanding that everybody likes to streamline and likes to minimize perceived obstacles. Everybody wants to race to the finish. And sometimes there are speed bumps that you didn't think were there and you'll trip over them. So bringing forward, hey, in this case, Forest Service, you want to do an 80,000 acre, 120,000 acre timber harvest and sale. Well, when was that cultural resources study done? Oh, really? You've only hit maybe 3,000 acres out of that. Well, it sounds like there's a potential for a lot of other resources to be at risk, tangible and intangible, as we heard. You know, how long ago was that inventory even? So, you know, how, if it's not, if you don't know what resources are there, you can't actually speak to a no adverse effect. So if you can't speak to a no adverse effect in the sale of the, and harvest actions, then there's an opportunity there to say, okay, great. To accomplish your need to get to that point for the sale, there's a need to do the work. Hire or contract us, the community, the tribe, to go forth and do that. You know, so, you know, the other part in that, and we bring this forward, you know, if there has been a recent study, who was the responsible party for doing the interpretation? And that's back to that example of thin lithic scatter. Well, if you find that thin lithic scatters are with unique lithic types at a particular elevation, well, maybe that's actually because that's a gathering area for bear grass, which means they're only accessible for, you know, 6 weeks out of the year. Therefore, these are actually very unique, and are not just thin lithic scatters. It's everything else there. So next, you know, here's another one, and we're working with, you know, ODOT, Oregon DOT, is a very active cultural resources department, and has been for a long period of time. And we work very closely with them, their cultural resources, and that's helped bring forward understanding and opportunity. You know, so this is a hypothetical, but not far out of the realm. But, you know, for instance, another opportunity might be an agency, in this case of state DOTs, wanting to fund 150 bridges in 3 counties to upgrade for seismic stability and increased vehicle traffic. And that, there's federal money there. In the case of Oregon, there's an understanding that even at state level, they need to be engaging with tribes. So we are in a unique situation here in Oregon. There's a good chance that those bridges, however, are at locations of, you know, home communities historically, reportage places, gathering or hunting or fishing. You know, a good place to cross the river is a good place to do a lot of things. And that brings us to, if there was no prior work done, that's still outstanding knowledge that needs to be brought forward. And it's not just about that location of the bridge. It's about talking about the interconnection of that place with every other bridge location. You know, the same way that those current bridges are connected by roads, there's a good chance that there were other points in other ways that those same locations on the map were connected previously. And it doesn't have to be 5,000 years ago. That could be just 150 years ago, that those points of connection can occur. And again, similar sorts of conversation of saying, you don't know what you're going to affect. So let's come together and engage in this, and let's find the way so that the tribe can speak for itself, be the recognized expert of itself that it is. So with funding, we've had other conversations, and there's a real need to be very practical and very honest about what the true cost of doing this work is. And every time I have a conversation with an agency about this, I've had to be very direct in saying, what does it cost to do this? And it's not hard math, but the number can get very large very quickly when you start to be honest about the work that is necessary. So just very simple things here. Yes, we can all figure out what the base rates are. We can all figure out what a daily rate is. But other things that get lost in there, cameras, tablets, computers, softwares, just a rig that can handle some of these landscapes, that adds up very quickly. That could easily get to around $100,000. Plus there's the mileage and per diem. At GSA rates, that gets very big pretty quickly. And if the tribe is having to front all of that, then that may be enough to say we can't do large projects because we can't front that money for our staff. And throw in elder stipend and honoraria. That's something that we do with all of our elders, that if we take them out to place. Being honest about going and visiting the same place at multiple times, because every season is a different way of understanding that place, and it prompts different understandings from elders in the community. And then that's just to get the understanding. Then you have to take that understanding and get it in a usable format. It's about transforming that from notes or audio to using the index cards and sticky notes on a map, or putting it into GIS. It's about making sure that you are translating the information or transforming that information that may be highly detailed, but is usable or shareable. You don't want to, we at Grand Ronde, there's a lot of information we will not share, just flat out. It's the last taking. This is information that's managed to survive everything. Systematic oppression and trying to beat it out of people, kill it off. And this is the information that has survived. And so, no, you don't get to have it. That stays in community. But we do need to find a way of sharing in a honest way the importance of it. So you don't get the details. You just have to have confidence in understanding the importance. So, we've approaches and opportunities. There are the agencies. As we started with BOEM. As you heard, BOEM is doing a 2.0. Needs more money. To be honest, you can go through intergovernmental agreements, in that if there's a mega project, and you can have that conversation early in the process, then the agency can start to make sure that there is a set aside for doing this kind of work. And for example, I was going to save this for later, but when to talk and communicate with tribes is really important. And this is for you agency reps in the audience. In our office, we share that we would like, when you think about a project, you should be talking to the tribe. When you ask for the money, you need to talk to the tribe. When you receive the money, you definitely need to have been talking to the tribe. And your last gate is you should be talking to the tribe when you're spending that money. And there's an inverse understanding in that earlier in that process, you're spending a little bit more time, but you're going to be able to scale and scope your projects in a way that you can help avoid, or the tribe may come forward and have the conversation about, hey, you know that you have a couple of resources, but you don't have an understanding of this and how these are connected. And so contract us to provide that understanding. We will take the detailed information and translate it. So you actually know if there's a mitigation, what you're having to mitigate for, and what you will be damaging if it proceeds this way, or because it's early in the process, you can do design modifications and save everybody a lot of heartache, and everybody can walk away with a good thumbs up. We've done straightforward contracted service. Agency needed an understanding, and we provided that. Then we've done a mitigation. It was written into a mitigation plan, much to my chagrin, but it got inserted by the agency. And so we wound up obligated by an agency to conduct this work. We got paid for it because the money wasn't a lot. We had to scale it back because we're very honest about what the cost is. In the end, we still have not broken even on any of the projects that we have done. But because that information we hold internally, it winds up still being worth it because it fits within our job duties, and we can keep using that information for more. So I think this is probably my last for real slide here. I'm going to leave a couple of kind of observations that I think when having conversations with agencies about funding for this are important. And the first observation is most project planners come from a biological or natural resources background. And with that, they bring kind of an understanding of how mitigation or budgeting and awareness can go, right? If you know your threatened endangered species of an area, you know your wetlands of an area, and if you don't know them, you can find them fairly quickly, and they're easily recognized early in the process. You can go to your little matrix and you can figure out, oh, well, yeah, I've got 5 bald eagles, I've got 3 wetlands, and a elk habitat. Great, I can quantify that, I can budget that for time and money, and yep, I can do mitigation bank, I'll do restoration over here. That is easily accounted for early in the process. It's easy in comparison to cultural resources, where it's the opposite. You keep spending money that you don't know how much you have to spend, and you have to keep spending money to keep learning more, and until you get to the end and you know as much as you need for your decision making and going forward. That's hard to budget for, both in time and real dollars. And that's a way, I believe, of having conversations with agencies about why a TCL approach early in any undertakings process will help with those conversations, because that's how you know how to scale and scope your projects, whether it's a timber sale or it's a bridge project, it's a channel dredging of a river. That these become ways of having those conversations and learning about it early. So I also shared, the when we like to be conversed with, that when you think about a project, because our experience is, if you think about a project, it may not get funded then, but somebody else will find funding for it in the future. When you go forward with a proposal, well, you've got a general idea of what you're doing. If you haven't talked to the tribe already, because the tribe knows a lot, right? Then how are we going to have that conversation down the road? Because I can help you avoid, and does that roundabout have to go there? Can we move that roundabout back 200 meters? Because that's a really important place, and you don't want to do that, because to do that where you think you want to do it, it's going to cost you a lot more, and you're still not going to be able to do it. So that's early in the process, we can help save money, quite frankly. And the other conversation point is, think about, this is for the agencies, think about how much you pay contractors. Why would you want to pay a tribe less? I work very closely with the cultural resource contractors in the area, and I learn how much money they have. I see the RFPs that go out. So from that avenue, I know how much they are being paid. And then an agency comes to the tribe to say, I want to do X. Tribe, can you just do one of those little TCL things that you do? And, we're going to hit you with 10%. That's what we've budgeted for you. That's insulting. That suggests that you don't believe in the value of the information that you're buying, that you don't have confidence in the tribe to know itself. You'll have confidence in outsiders to know more about the tribe and its way of being on the landscape. And so those are hard conversations, but sometimes they've been necessary. And I think that there are ways of overcoming that and making sure that TCLs become complementary in process, not in conflict in process, because it does save time, it saves money, it helps with communication as well. So with that, I'm noticing the time, I apologize, and we can throw it open to some questions. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see everybody.
Awesome job, Carol. Our AV guy made that happen for us. Thank you so much. What questions do you have for our panelists? What does this bring up for you? And do you have something you'd like to share about work that you've done related to this? And I'm gonna run the microphone.
Questions, comments? I have a comment. I apologize. That was my alarm that was going off in my backpack over here. And I was out there. Thank you, Shayna, for running out my backpack and being like, it's gonna blow. Not seeing any hands. You guys are just so good. What? No, Brees, you don't get to ask questions.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's the cost of not being there. No, I actually was really curious from Anna. How do you think, and Matthew, how do you think that kind of the intangible of the relationship with taking the approaches that you have? You spoke in a positive way about Berkeley, and I'm curious if you see connections in that with this kind of broader landscape understanding.
Sorry, it was a little bit broken up. Can you say that again?
Oh, sorry. Is that better? I was asking about, with developing these relationships and, whether it's in the fire, and, because you're coming from a fire background, speaking fire, or, and with the work that you're doing, the partnering with um, Berkeley, are you seeing this kind of translate into this broader understanding and confidence of people outside a community having confidence in your knowledge of the landscape?
Yeah, that's a good question. Interestingly, I think the more we've been working with this small group with UC Berkeley, we've been able to really kind of come together and find ways to translate that better to the outside community. I think just the work that we've been doing with the technology, I think, and then my kind of translating to them our viewpoints and how and what I've been taught. It just really opened their minds so much that they're better able to really communicate that to say other staff within the university or other departments. New students, yes. And that's been critical, I think, the more we work with Professor June Sinceri at UC Berkeley, as his students come through, they're very young, and I'm seeing that these younger people are so much more open-minded and receptive to, I guess, those intangibles that we always talk about, that when we're translating from our side to the outside world, there's a lot lost in that translation. And in my case, sometimes I just don't know how to put it to words. And sometimes, from our past history and the way we did things, there are no words for a lot of this. So we're kind of reinventing and creating new topics and issues that we're trying to deal with culturally and get the public to understand that. And also at the same time, I think it's been super important, and I've been trying to really focus on that public education part. I was actually, for a good year, participating in a lot of the we call PBAs that they're popping up in California. These are like prescribed burn associations. These are like neighborhood networks. They get together and they burn their land, but they have to do it through the resource conservation districts. Say Placer County RCD, they do the burn plan, they do all the heavy lifting, and it's kind of a grant process too, so the landowner doesn't have to pay out of pocket. So when they do these types of projects, they open it up for the landowners, usually typically open it up for outside individuals to come in and learn how to better take care of their own land. And that is like the perfect opportunity for me to interject and give them a little education on cultural burning and how we feel about putting fire on the ground. And I've been trying to really specify that, you really got to look at your preparation versus just the activity of burning. The preparation is just so critical. And I think that's where agencies fail. They don't do any preparation. They just reduce the fuel. They convert fuel by mastication. So it's an aerial fuel. Now it's a ground fuel. So it's still a fuel. But yeah, it's really been kind of challenging, but the more I've been out and exposing my ideas to, say, private landowners in the community, they're becoming more receptive. Our first burn actually it's in a pretty populated neighborhood. So neighbors and people were commenting, and I noticed on social media that somebody mentioned that the property was going to be we're going to be burning out on that property. So they're just kind of giving the community a heads up. Say, hey, if you see smoke, don't call it in. They're doing some prescribed fire on the land. And out of all those comments that people responded to on that, I only heard one negative comment. An individual said, fire is bad. It's bad for the environment. Oh, that person made a big mistake because everybody on that social media site in the community just jumped on them and corrected them and educated them. And it was like, wow, where did they get that information? You know, it's almost like it was me talking. So it was, I thought it was just so reassuring, I think, just knowing that the community is starting to get that. And I think they really understand because they've seen the devastation and loss of life, loss of property, people trying to escape these fires and burning alive in their cars. That really was opening eyes, I think. So people are starting to shift their attitude from fire's not a good thing, smoke's bad, it's polluting the air. But what they're seeing through just our burn that one particular weekend, we're burning an area where typically all that smoke from locals burning piles all settles in this little low area called Meadow Vista. And they're very opinionated people in this town. So we were kind of a little concerned about the smoke. And there's actually sensors placed around the area to monitor. And we were working with the Placer County Air Pollution Control Board on this control burn, and she was present, and she was kind of curious to see if any of these sensors were going to detect our smoke. And we actually did. We put up some pretty good smoke, and I was impressed with the fact that well, we picked a really good burn window, and the wind was perfect. So it was allowing that smoke to really just go up into the air and disperse instead of blowing straight into that low area and settling and creating an inversion layer. So it was I actually drove it into down into that town, and there was absolutely no evidence of smoke. You couldn't even smell it. So nobody really even had an idea that we burned out there. We did 15 acres, and it was pretty impressive. I mean, we had one negative comment, and that was, to me, it was just, that was a win. So, but yeah, it's, our community is really coming around. It's been a pull, but we're getting there, I think. Does that answer your question?
Anyone else? So I'm really happy to hear what you guys are doing, and we know that it's happening, the bringing back the fire to the land in California. The Karuk tribe is doing a lot of work. You all are doing work. And in Southern California, we're doing that too. We have a fire cadre that we're training up in Southern California to bring back this prescribed, well, sorry, not prescribed, but sometimes you call it that because that's what people understand, but bringing back controlled fire, fire that's good for the landscape. And I would ask any of you, because this is very much Western focused. Not everybody has wildfire like the way we do in the West, but do any of you have traditional practices that you're wanting to bring back to the land that's going to make the land healthier? And that, but that you have concerns that the non-tribal communities around you are not going to understand, that you can share with us? Don't make me call on people. All right.
Good morning again. My name is Cassandra Atencio. I am the THPO with the Southern Ute Indian Tribe in Ignacio, Colorado. And so the one thing I'm really glad that you're doing what you're doing. And the one thing that we always like to do when we're engaging with our forest or anybody is we do low rolling, because those CMTs of those pill trees with the modified. So we do low rolling and we clear the duff. We've asked them. So we've developed a process with our partners to make sure that that's what they do whenever they want to do a burn. The other thing that we ask is that for them to repropagate those mother plants. And so before, if they're able to come out and burn and they see those plant species, because sometimes bringing in a seed mix, it doesn't contain the native plants that are within that thing, within that mix. And so we ask that they propagate those seed plants so that way, because as you know, when you go out there to pick plants and you go to gather, you say a prayer, you know, and you make your offerings and you talk to them. And when you talk to them, that adds that strength to it, because you know that at one point your ancestors and your relatives that have gone on, because a lot of us don't live where we used to be. You know, we're in different places, but our homelands are still connected to us. So we ask that we know that our mothers or our elders and those that have gone on laid those prayers down for all of us and for them to. And so we owe that to them and those prayers and those plants to make sure that they're repropagated, and that strength that came with those offerings and those prayers are still connected and carry us through. And so that's kind of one of the things that we ask for. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something that we're really trying to do as well. I feel like in our area, there are really no native plant seed sources anyway. Or for native plants. I mean, if you have one, it's usually propagated from seed out of the area anyway. So we're really kind of critical on that, and we want to, through the burning, actually start repropagating from the seed coming off of that land right there. So we're not bringing in outside seed sources. And to us, that's like contaminating, even though it's native plants. But I think Caltrans is like one of the biggest ones with that. They use, like you said, mixes and, you know, wildflowers, and it's always the same kind of native plants. And you drive up and down the highways, it's all you see is the same plant species. So, and they're probably not even from that area. It could be anywhere in the state. So, yeah, I really feel like, and you said it perfectly. It's, you know, it goes down to how you propagate and all the way to how you harvest that plant and what you're using it for. And my grandmother had a song that she would sing. And so she would sing of the plant so that she was letting the plant know what she was using it for and why. And, you know, I think that's something that I want to bring into this crew also, is that knowledge. You know, how we propagate, how we treat the plants, and how we gather and collect, and how to be respectful and honor. So yeah, it's going to be, that's why I say this crew is going to be pretty unique. Probably not the first time, but it will be for California, a very unique hand crew. They'll be better armed with traditional knowledge of the landscape, the plants, the animals, and the connections between it all. Where, you know, you're not going to see agency crews with any of that knowledge. So they don't have the connection. And we know our sites and where they're at. So I think we would be able to be more effective. Actually, having a crew like that on fires would be so beneficial for the agencies to, I don't know, just create less of the negative effect on the landscape through suppression. Thank you, though. That was a
Thanks,
good
Matt.
comment.
I actually came over here because I'd asked Mr. Rod if he would share something that he called to talk to me about, but now we have a raised hand. So we'll do that next.
I've worked with the Federal Highway Administration in the past, and they've conducted studies to determine effects of wildflower and plants, different plants, on the psychological impacts in communities. And they have discovered, as a result of that analysis, that certain plants appropriately placed in communities can literally calm communities. So where you have speeding many times, we have angry drivers and issues that have developed, researchers have determined that simply by planting plants and flowers, it has a strange but beneficial impact on that community. What's missing there, and I would strongly encourage, I think I think we may be saying the same thing. What if you sat down with the state and the Federal Highway Administration with a listing of local flowers and plants and encourage them to plant these things on reservation roads? When I discovered the research that had been done and the beneficial impact on the communities that these plants and their wildflowers and plants that were intentionally planted on the roadside throughout the country, I asked a question and I got an embarrassing answer. The question was, which reservations are you providing these plants, and how have you coordinated with local native communities and determine what plants are natural and they would like to see? The response was, oh, we don't do that. We haven't done that. That's a wonderful opportunity for us. It's not a question of inventing something. It's there already. The only thing that we have to do is to raise our hand with some information and observe the benefits of our community calming, literally calming down. And it has just so many beneficial impacts, and we've just missed the mark. The federal government is not going to come out to you and offer it, nor the state. But if you sit down and talk to them, they'll be more than interested in listening and planting wildflowers and different plants throughout our communities. So thank you for your presentation. And I simply forgot about that impact until this presentation. But it's an opportunity for all of us to improve the environment of our home communities. Thank you.
I can't see the rest of the audience, so I apologize. Oh, great. I didn't want to talk over anybody. I think that's a great idea that we've had similar conversations here in Oregon. We've been a little bit more specific in saying we want particular plants of particular quality. If we're doing basketry material, it's not just that all juncus is the same. It needs to be juncus that's transplanted from particular places so that we can bring that back into community, make it more accessible. Because those patches have been around for generations. They're the product of everybody working hard to, work towards the right characteristics of that plant. And we want that back, not just any old juncus or hazel. We worked with an agency. We were talking hazel. They were talking hazel. They were all for putting hazel in. Turns out they were talking about European hazel and not the local hazel. Missed mark, really a prime example of how we need to make sure that we're communicating in the same language sometimes. And that, we've also done our own work with our own replanting and kind of monitoring that planting and have the conversations about spend your money more wisely when you're doing restoration. These are the plants of hardiness for here, whether that's elevation, because plants getting put in the valley are much different than the plants, same species, but the hardiness is different if you were doing something up in elevation. And that's it. Those conversations, like you're saying, lead to even better conversations. So thank you.
Okay, good morning. I wasn't kind of prepared to speak to this, but I've been asked to, and it was mentioned earlier by Valerie up on the stage before this presentation. But it's a low, as far as low impact assessments, in the sense of looking at areas where there be landscapes and proactive mitigation of those areas, perhaps we can say, in a sense, because we're dealing with the cultural. And why I say mitigation in a sense, because it has overall effects from like your fire regimes that you're utilized, that were utilized by Grand Ronde and others. But I'm weaving this in, trying to weave this in a sense of what I'm going to speak about, because it not too long ago, I was brought into a situation, and it affects every tribe in this room, and I was brought into this situation of a low impact assessment. By saying that, we were was looking at it from an archaeological view, and then I was looking at it from a traditional view of this use of detection dogs. Now, I'm bringing this in because it has to deal with our boarding schools. They're being used right now to assess those boarding school areas and find the burials that were not necessarily within a defined area of that cemeteries per se. But we got to looking at this and thinking about it as an assessment tool. And why I'm bringing that up is because from an archaeologist view, we've never had in the profession a way to predict the location of a burial per se. We haven't ever had something that has even a modicum of percentage that there is something present. Now, why that is pertinent is because now it changes our consultation, what we can do on projects, whether they're large scale, small scale, etc. You were mentioning or showing the impacts at a bridge or some bridges on one of your slides. I can't remember which one of you were showing that, but okay, Grand Ronde. And you're saying that they were fishing camps there or potentially portage areas or whatever. My point is, they're dealing with a project down in Illinois, and it's an extension of a railroad next to a major highway. And it's near Cahokia. And all of you probably are aware of what Cahokia was and is. And the vast amount of people that were there. Whether you believe the figure of 10,000, 20,000, 40,000, whatever. But my point is that it was a vast area of use. And so when they were wanting to extend and create this railroad and then their sites in the way, I said, well, wait a minute, hold on here. You've excavated part of it, but there's still quite a bit of area. And we had a presentation by a lady from Kentucky at one of our WeTrick meetings in Wisconsin back in June or August, I'm sorry. And she presented about using the dogs, and boy, I really got interested. And the reason I'm bringing that out is because this was never possible before. You can use ground penetrating radar. You can use gradiometers. You can use magnetometers, but it does not tell you that that's a burial. It only tells you there's an anomaly or something, whatever that something is, below surface. That's all it tells you. You try to form as in your assessment that there is some, maybe it's a grave, maybe it is a burial. But when that dog comes and What I was amazed at their capacity, their ability. And that dog goes and lays down on that spot and tells you someone's here. Whether it's 200 years old, 50 years old, 5,000 years old, the molecules of our bodily components are still there, and that dog detects it. And what does this all mean to us? Why am I talking about it? Because now it becomes predicted. It's predicted now. There is something there. It tells you there are, like on this project in Illinois, there's 4 other places, 4 places that dog went and told, there's a burial here. Now what are we going to do? What is the archaeologist going to do? What is the federal manager going to do? What's, you see? Because now you know, with whatever you percentage you believe, and the archaeologist is looking at the low end because they don't want something that's going to interfere with the process for excavation and or for the physical anthropologist, for assessment, for analysis, etc. of our peoples. So why am I saying that? Because now it affects how that we sit at the table, and where it's a low impact assessment of an area without invasive, without disturbance. Now you know grandma and grandpa's there. What are you going to do? What is the archaeologist going to do? What is the project manager going to do? How does it affect the way that we now negotiate? It's there. It's a tool now. I'm becoming a very strong advocate for this because over time, we had the unanticipated discoveries. Okay. It was unanticipated. We didn't know grandma and grandpa was there. Now we do. What does that do now? How does it affect the process and our capacity to strongly, as well as we can now, strongly say we do not want this place disturbed? So you know it's there. Of course, the environmental and the archaeologist is using ground penetrating radar after the dog tells there's something there. And so there can be a signature, perhaps a cadre of multiple projects, and placing what can be predicted by mechanical means instead of the dogs. I'm going to trust the dogs. I'd rather trust them. My point in all of this right now is pretty simple. I really would encourage everyone to look into this, because you may have used them before. You may have been involved in projects. I haven't been on a real project per se with dogs yet. I've only watched them they demonstrate what they do, and they found things. It was amazing to watch. But just looking ahead here and thinking about this as a low impact assessment of an area without invasive techniques and methodologies being used. It's kind of off topic about a lot of what we've been talking about this morning, but on the other hand, had the opportunity maybe to say a few words about it, and really encourage all the THPOs to look at this, because it will change the way that we will consult if we pursue it and force, as I did with the Corps of Engineers, them to use the dogs. Now we know there's somebody there at that project. Now what are we going to do? All right. So there will be an adverse effect. it has to deal with that. It has, the implication here is tremendous. So really hope, maybe there's other times that we can have more forum on this or a venue, but just wanted to bring it up this time and, I don't know, hopefully, it's contributed. Thank you.
I just wanted to add something real quick to the canine forensic surveys. A great way to use them when you have archaeologists recording their archaeological sites and they say suspected burials, and then they draw a line, a circle around that cultural site. So when you bring in the canine forensic dogs to do a survey of that cultural site, they're going to detect human remains. They're going to detect the burial soils, and those burial soils also they move. They don't always just stay in the same place. So those dogs can be detecting that the burials are human remains or cremations that are outside of that drawn line. And that means that you need to redraw that line, and that boundary of that cultural site may be a lot bigger now and needs that avoidance and protection now. So that is another great way to use the canine forensics dogs, is to just make those boundary determinations. And we always challenge the archaeological boundaries, because we know that they're drawn from the archaeological perspective, and they don't always take in consideration what's underground. And the canine forensics are a great way to make sure that you are not going to be impacting any of the ancestors because the archaeologists drew the line. So that's another method.
Thank you, Anna. And we've had one last comment here that Mr. Silva, I believe, right, wanted everyone to know that dogs can also find bodies underwater. Is this on? And so with that, we're going to wrap up and go to a short break before we reconvene for our 11 o'clock panel. And I have a couple of announcements, and then Shasta does as well. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Brees. We hope you make a full recovery. I think that was just a gift. And I think for NATHPO's purposes, I see infinite ways that we can continue to move this forward and provide venues and forums for further discussion of many, many topics related to this as we continue this movement. What was my first announcement? Oh, if you're not going on the field trip this afternoon, Sheila Bird would like everyone to know that she is available to continue doing THPO talk interviews in the small conference room out here. So if you're feeling a little bit shy, I hope that you might be able to get over that, and please take advantage of this wonderful opportunity we have to go and have some THPO talk with Sheila. Mr. Silva also has a handout that he would like to has some copies of. He has some copies of, if you would like, related to the offshore wind topic that keeps coming up. I did want to mention our United Auburn partners also have some printed copies of their 106 process guide that they've developed that they talked a little bit about, and those are out at their registration desk.
Okay, just in case people trickle out, just remember that the field trip, if you're going on the field trip, meet in the Cherokee Tower lobby. The buses leave at 1 o'clock. I've been to the Katua site and I highly recommend it. So please join that trip if you've registered for it. Also, somebody lost some money, so come see me and bargain for it. No, I'm kidding. Somebody really did lose some money. I don't have it, but check in with our folks at the registration desk if you found that you have lost some cash. And then finally, if you are checking out tomorrow morning, just remember that checkout is 11 a.m. So you need to check out before coming to our final sessions for tomorrow morning, and you can bring your luggage with you or check it in with the Bell folks at the registration. And all right, that's it. Get some coffee and we'll reconvene in a few.